Good afternoon and welcome back to the channel. So we last left you in the small little village in Portugal as we first crossed the border. And this week we've had a massive adventure. We've driven the length of the country, visiting Porto, down through to Lisbon, and finally the Algarve before heading over the bridge and into Spain. So sit back and relax and watch the adventures with Carly. After a really lovely evening in the little town of Alfândega de Fí, we had a leisurely start to the morning, walked around to the local market, had a coffee, and then it's time to hit the road heading for Porto. If anyone of you've driven in Portugal, you'll know how absolutely stunning the scenery is. Breathtaking, sweeping fields, mountains, hills, over some really lovely architecture, bridges, around lakes and rivers. Is absolutely stunning, and the roads are in such good condition. It made me feel really jealous for the drivers over here compared to what we have to face back home. That was, of course, until we got off of the motorway heading for the campsite that turned into really narrow roads covered in cobbles that shook living daylights out of both the car and Carly. And then we pulled up to the campsite itself. The campsite itself come across as very nice when we first arrived there. We weren't given a pitch number like a lot of European pitches and just told to find one ourselves and go and let reception know. It was only when we was driving through and seeing how packed out the campsite was and how narrow the caravan pitches were on the sides of the hills with really steep inclines in some of it, that's on really soft dirt track. The car started struggling trying to get friction, trying to pull the caravan up some of them, especially under the tree canopies themselves, which was an absolute nightmare, as you have seen from Abby's video itself. That evening we had a chill out night and then relaxed, ready for the big day ahead of us tomorrow as we went off to Porto to explore for the day. We had tickets booked for the Taylor's Port Tour, which included wine tasting at the end, something we'd both really look forward to. The Taylor's is one of the biggest brands of port that we drink on a regular occasion back home. And the port tour itself was absolutely amazing. It was really interactive for the kids and something we'd both be looking forward to. The tour itself utilises the Wi-Fi freely available across the site and using QR codes to tell you the story and go to each checkout point, hit the QR code, it'll tell you the next part of the story. It takes you through the history of port, how they've been making it over generations, and how it's barreled and the whole process all the way through. You then go into the next room, which is a huge warehouse. And as you open the door, this aroma of port hits you, it's straight in the nostrils. It's amazing. It's like a really sweet smell in the air, which they call the angel's share. And it's the evaporated port through the oak barrels. As you get to the end of the warehouse, there's this massive vat that holds 133,000 litres of port, which equates to 177,000 bottles, which the machine then takes your photo at. It's not just the history of port it takes you through and how it manufactures it. The tour itself takes you through the history of making barrels by Coopers that the company employs themselves, which Henry found really interesting. As the tour progresses, it takes you through different types of ports and the vintages of different ports. Abby was quite happy to find a bottle here of vintage from the year she was born in 95. And having a quick look at the vino, it was quite a reasonable price at only £189 for a bottle. Now, as somebody that's enjoyed a glass of port at the end of many regimental dinner nights, we've often heard of the saying about that. Do you know the Bishop of Norwich? And meaning that someone hasn't passed the port on. It's quite interesting to hear the actual or a possible actual history of it, going back to the original Bishop of Norwich from 1805 to 1837. Bishop Bathurst lived to the age of 93. When it came to it, his eyesight was deteriorating and he developed a tendency to fall asleep at the table towards the end of a meal. As a result, he often failed to pass on the port, and therefore, do you know the Bishop of Norwich was used to anyone that had stopped passing the port over, which I thought was quite interesting. And to stop this exact thing happening, here you'll find a very old decanter that comes with a rounded base. Now, the bottom of the decanter is a complete bulb, so if you put it on the table without the holder itself, it would fall over, pouring its contents over the table, deterring people from stopping to put the port down. The idea would be the host would have the base to it, would lift the port, pour themselves and their guests' port as it passed around the room. No one would be able to put it down without it rolling over until it got back to the host, who could sit it safely back into its base. The last stop was into the vintage room, a massive array of bottles of vintages of varying years. It was interesting to see that lots of white paint was over the bottle. And as it come through, the idea with the vintage, because it ages in the bottle and not the barrel, was that they would put white paint on the top of the barrel, of the top of the bottle when it was put away in the rack. When it came to serving the bottle, they would keep that white mark to the top of the bottle. They would heat up a pair of tongs to a really high temperature over a candle, clamp it around the stem of the bottle, and then pour cold water over it, which would snap it off instantly. They would then use that to decant it, keeping the white to the top, into a decanter, which would mean all the remaining sediment, instead of filtering through into the glass, would stay at the bottom of the bottle and be discarded. As I said earlier, it's quite interactive for the children, and here you can see Henry having a go at a computer game trying to put the corks back onto the bottles. And finally, the best bit. After the tour concludes, you go out into this lovely garden that's all covered in umbrellas and lovely little tables. And one of the very knowledgeable waiters comes out to you and gives you a selection of what ports to try, along with tasting notes, what would be best go with, and describes the wines themselves in detail. It was here that Abby finally decided that she's, after all these years of not liking port, not only enjoyed the white port, which isn't something she's ever done before, she also quite liked the red port as well. So we ended up having to buy some local white port to go with it for that evening. Here you see even the kids aren't left out, and they're left with local grape juice. Obviously, they're not allowed to get stuck into the port, but they very much enjoyed having their cold grape juice and joining in. Because the Taylor's grounds sit quite high up the hill, overlooking the city of Porto and the river Douro, you see a lot of the other famous port houses along the river bank, including Sandeman's and Graham's, which is quite cool to see as well. And no trip to Taylor's would be complete without a trip to the gift shop, looking at some really lovely ports. Unfortunately, well out of my price bracket, as you can see. After we completed our tour and tasting, we walked down the banks of the Douro to the Dom Louis Bridge that was built in 1886 by a partner of the guy that invented the Eiffel Tower. Amazing architecture, and the kids really enjoyed walking over the top of it with trains going over the top of them. As you can also see, there's a gondola style lift that goes from the top of the hill right across the city to the bottom side of it. But at the cost of €5 per head per way, it was something we thought we'd bypass. So, coming from the historic side of the city, moving over the bridge into the more touristy side of the city, you see a lot of the markets and the sellers retailing everything from handbags to paintings, key rings to magnets, and all the normal touristy stuff all along the banks of the Jura. As time was getting on, we found a lovely little restaurant to have lunch at, and we've from the start of this trip, we've really encouraged the kids to have different types of food and try all the local bits and pieces. So Henry opted for an elegant fruit salad that was absolutely stuffed full of stuff to eat. Abby had the seafood, and I just had a couple of little bits. So I had the local sardinas, which were absolutely spot on, and both children enjoyed those, as well as the calamari caught fresh that day, which was really tasty. And then after a very busy day, it was time to get back to the campsite, chill out in the pool for an hour, and then go back to Carly for some homemade pizzas. The next day, we had a fresh start, packed up Carly, and went down heading for Lisbon, which was the next day of our trip in Portugal. When we arrived at the campsite itself, we found it was the same hotel group as the previous one, although it's still pick your own pitch. These ones we found to be much more spacious, not as all packed in, and generally it's a much more pleasant setting. There was plenty of shade around, as well as a very high standard of facilities on site, which is ideal, as well as a lovely little pool. The next day we was up and early again, and we was off to Lisbon for the day. Now, as this is the first time either of us had been to Portugal, everyone said you got to visit Lisbon, and we found that a lot of the architecture was really stunning. A lot of the famous places were really lovely to look at, but we found it very hot and very packed. The streets were just a bustle with people, and not really what you need to do when the temperatures are touching 40 degrees. One of the things Lisbon's very famous for is its running of old trams throughout the city, and the most famous one being Tram 28. Um, there was a huge queue, and we're talking 2.5, possibly 3 hours of people waiting to get on Tram 28. But again, Abs doing the research found that there was another tram that run almost the same track, called Tram 12, and there was no queue whatsoever for it. We got there, got to the front of this queue that looked like we was queue jumping. The next tram turned up. It was a tram 12. We got on it, and the kids had a great time going through the city. With a health and safety head on, it was absolutely terrifying being on these trams, seeing people just walking in front of them, vehicles parked across the tram tracks, and causing the tram to have to stop at quite short notice. Bearing in mind it's a tram, it's metal wheels on a metal railing, so how they managed to get around town without hitting anyone, I have no idea. Another tick off the list location that we wanted to visit. Abs had read up about. She wanted to go and see the Pink Street, so we took the kids down there. It was covered in umbrellas, and they thought it was brilliant. So here's the photos from that. And back to food time again. As we said, the big theme across this is getting the kids to try new foods, and every place we go to, we'll try the local regional cuisine. Myself, I started off with a cabbage and chorizo soup that was absolutely delicious. And in all of the shops, we've seen this very smelly salted cod that was hanging up everywhere, and it didn't look very appetizing. But by the time the guys had prepared it in the restaurant and made it into a salad, it was absolutely delicious. It wasn't salty at all. Something I was really expecting. It was really tasty fish without being fishy. Absolutely lovely. And as the Portugal tour started with port, the alcohol theme carried on throughout Lisbon. We come across the Museum of Beer, which we stopped for a pint for, and then we come across a wine house that had almost every bottle of vintage and normal wine they've ever sold in Portugal. I think the walls were covered of it, and you can organise tastings and pay for sessions in there. Very rarely do the kids have McDonald's back home, only as a rare treat. And we'd had a joke about seeing all the different types of McDonald's, all the different countries we'd been to. So finally we caved in, and they was allowed a McDonald's as a treat for being so good and walking so far. So the kids are getting stuck into their McDonald's. It was interesting to see you could also get it served, Happy Meals served with Heineken for a drink as well, which was quite novel. And after a leisurely morning, we got up, packed up Carly, and headed down to the Algarve. Not too bad drive, so we had plenty of time, and we couldn't check in for it till 3 afterwards anyway. So just took our time and went down. It's absolutely stunning scenery on the way down. The mountains turning into rolling coastline. It was some of the scenes were absolutely breathtaking. And then you get off the main road and you get through these tiny little towns again. All these campsites seem to be not set up for put in a caravan whatsoever. The guy wasn't at home at the time, so he'd text us the details, but the code was wrong. So we had to pull in off the road, get hold of the gentleman who gave us the correct code to get in through the gate. And then we drove up to a very surreal campsite. It wasn't so much a campsite as just an area of land that the guys rented various bits of it out to. Um, Found it up on Park for Night, so there's little spots on the way up there where people have built shacks and houses, and we come across the top of the hill where he wanted us to park. Stunning views, absolutely clear skies, you could see for miles. The shower facilities were a bit atrocious, so we just had Carly showers and it ignored that one. But as you can see from the drone, there's just nothing but rolling hills for miles. Absolutely stunning at night. Myself and Abs, when we got back, sat down, had a glass of wine out in the nights and just saw all the stars in the sky. It was amazing. Once we'd settled in, we got all the aircon working, so the caravan was nice and cool for the dog. Left her here in the shade, so she was nice and chilled out, and we headed off to the beach. Now, not having been to the area before, we didn't know what to expect really. As it transpired, it was very similar to Benidorm in the fact it was packed with Brits and people on in all the local hotels. They're all there trying to turn Portugal into England. There's various restaurants selling fish and chips and all the rest of the good stuff, as well as British beer, which we couldn't quite understand. The beach itself was absolutely stunning. The sand was amazing. The water, however, was absolutely frozen, and we could only see a couple of people swimming in it. We ourselves only managed to go knee deep, and no one wanted any more than that. For our main meal that evening, we got back in the car and drove out a bit further away. And we found a lovely little Italian restaurant that all the locals eat at. The food there was half the price of the stuff that was on the front and tasted so much better. All fresh, made to order. So there was a little bit of wait on the time, but it was made for you, so there's no messing around. Abs had the tuna steak that was on special, and both myself and her had never tasted tuna so fresh and seared, and the way it had been cooked. Both of us thought it was steak. It was, oh, they've got the wrong order, but no, it was tuna. It was absolutely delicious. So in the morning, we packed up, hooked up Carly, and that concluded our tour of Portugal. We started off and heading for Spain, crossed over the bridge, and that's where we'll leave you. And that concludes our week in Portugal. The whole family has really enjoyed Portugal. We've never been before, yet it was a place we would definitely visit again. We've already said we'd love to come over, not necessarily with Carly, but get a flight over, stay in the hotel, and get a hire car and just explore some more of the country itself. We only had a week here. There is so much to see and do. It wasn't enough, so we headed for some of the key points that we really wanted to get off the chalked off the list. The scenery was absolutely stunning. So some of the views over the mountains and over the coastline were absolutely breathtaking. The food was mouthwatering, absolutely delicious, and the people are some of the most friendly Europeans we've ever come across. They can't do enough for you to help you, support you, give you encouragement where to go, what foods to try, and they really were the people that made the trip. Now, we did go to the touristy parts. We went to Porto, we went to Lisbon, and went to the Algarve, and we was expecting to bump into lots of other tourists, but that's not the real Portugal. The real Portugal is where you go over an evening and discover little restaurants in little villages off the beaten track, where Cost of food and drink is really cheap compared to the UK. The people providing that service put everything into it. Everything's freshly cooked for you. What sort of foods do you like? What you utilizing some places where they don't speak English, utilizing translate apps, etc. And they are really helpful and do everything they can for you. So yeah, massively coming back. It's been amazing. Next week you'll see us traveling into Spain. So we're heading up towards to discover Seville, down to Gibraltar, and then we're following the east coast all the way up to Barcelona and back into France. So like and subscribe, stay tuned, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.